Welcome to the Bayesian Conspiracy. I'm Steven Zuber.
I'm Eneasz Brodsky.
How's it going, man?
Good. Having a great time out here in California at Lighthaven. This place is fucking amazing.
I have an observation to make. You called the other day, and for whatever reason, the voice on the phone sounded so unlike you that I saw your number, but I thought it was somebody calling from your phone. And so I was like, who's this? And you're like, Eneasz Brodsky from Lighthaven? As if I knew another Eneasz, which was funny. But the funny part was that you identified with Lighthaven already. Like, you already are so ingrained as a Californian, not properly Californian, as a Berkeleyan.
Yeah.
I think that's just a fun observation. I think you feel at home there.
I really do. I think the main reason I said that is because I knew that you knew I was at Lighthaven, and that is probably not a thing too many people knew. Although, no, I did say it on the last podcast, didn't I? I was trying to add details that the latest LLM or a spoofer of my voice wouldn't know.
I was going to ask you to prove it if you still didn't sound like yourself when I switched to the other headphones, but it worked out fine. And you're right. Like, I see where you're coming from.
Do you know what you would have asked to ask me to prove that I'm me?
Not right off. I might ask something about like the podcast or stuff that is findable, but not easily findable.
It would take someone a number of seconds at least.
Right.
And during that delay, you'd be like, haha, I hear typing. Fuck you.
Yeah, gotcha. Nice try.
All right. We should start with feedback because we have a fair bit of it before we get into our main topic.
Yeah, let's do it.
As listeners can probably tell already, today is not an episode with a guest. We are going to be talking about a thing that we found online. So first thing is more of an announcement than a feedback. Starting today, or tomorrow for the patrons, you can listen to the Significant Digits audiobook podcast.
Wait, shouldn't that be backwards? Tomorrow for patrons sounds like it's that they're getting it late.
That is a good confusion to clear up. The patrons may not listen to this episode the day it drops, and I wouldn't want to lie to them if they're listening to it on Thursday and they're like, oh man, I gotta wait till Friday. So if you are hearing this on Wednesday, the 30th of October, you can right now go listen to the Significant Digits audiobook podcast. The very first episode has just dropped. It is presented by Ask Who from Ask Who Casts AI.
High five, Ask Who.
Hell yeah. He's doing his whole cast of different voices for every single character. For people who are not familiar, this is kind of the unofficial sequel to Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality. It was not written by Eliezer, but Eliezer has read it and said that it is good and he likes it. And yeah, you could kind of consider it the unofficial sequel.
I think he called it the canonical ending.
Did he really?
I might be able to find a source for that, but I'm pretty sure on Reddit or somewhere at some point, I remember him saying, consider this the canonical ending or the canonical sequel. Because for years, people were asking like, hey, what about that sequel you mentioned? He's like, it's Significant Digits.
He mentioned he might write an epilogue, which I think is what people questioned him about.
That might have been
a lot. And he was like, you want an epilogue? Here's an epilogue for you.
Right.
So the weird thing about this for me is that Ask Who asked if he could use an AI clone of my voice to do the narration and Harry. That threw me into a little bit of an existential crisis, which is kind of lame to put it that way. But I had many thoughts and feels, and I started writing them out in this big old blog post. It was going to just be a draft to show to a few people on the Discord and a few friends, and be like, all right, so here's all my thoughts and my pros and my cons and my feelings. What do you think I should do? But by the time I got to the end of it, I was like, I have done the thing where I write out my internal state, and that has helped me understand what my internal state is. So I did the thing where I write what I'm thinking to find out what I'm thinking. By the time I got to the end of it, I just texted Ask Who and was like, yeah, go for it. So it uses my voice. I'm still just a teeniest bit weirded out by it, but I think it's great that we have this technology. I'm happy if other people are made happy by hearing my voice in something fictional again. So here we go.
Did you publish that post?
No, but I'm going to publish it the same day that Significant Digits publishes.
Oh, good, because I did get to read it beforehand, and it was really well put. I think that you articulated, you said it was lame or something or dramatic to call it existential dread or crisis, but if you found that verbiage too strong, read the post. I think you put it really, really well. As a listener of the Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality audiobook, hearing Significant Digits in your voice will be a fun, nostalgic throwback, and it seems appropriate. But as for your reservations about it, rather than dig into it, I encourage everyone to check out the blog post. It's not that long of a read, and it's really, really interesting.
Well, in that case, the blog post is going up on my personal blog the same day as Significant Digits. I'll link it in the show notes. I will finally hear it all the way through for the first time.
Same here. I never actually finished reading it. Enjoying it in audio form will make it much easier. And another big shout out to Ask Who. We're not official partners or whatever, but you're awesome, dude. Thanks for doing this. I know it's a lot of work, and he does have a patron at askwhocastsai.patreon.com. I encourage everyone to support it. It's so valuable. Not only does it curate my list of stuff that I want to read, I don't have the bandwidth to search all my blogs and stuff, but I do have the bandwidth to let my podcatcher automatically download them for me.
Yeah. And he's doing a bunch of other rat fixes as well. He's doing Luminosity. He just finished Plane Crash. That's actually why he started getting significant digits, because the last episode of Plane Crash just posted. He's doing Pokemon Origin of the Species and Animorphs. So a whole bunch of things going on over there.
It's awesome.
Speaking of reading things that are very long, I want to move on to our first piece of real feedback, and this is feedback from me.
All right.
And this isn't even feedback about our podcast, it's feedback about something else.
Go for it.
So I've read a couple of reviews now of Deep Utopia. Deep Utopia is Nick Bostrom's latest book. Big old tome. It's 468 pages talking about, if everything goes absolutely right, what could the perfect transhuman future look like?
And variations therein. If we get some stuff, what would that look like? What kinds of things are we willing to, or would we be happy to sacrifice and stuff like that? So
everything I've read in the book reviews reminds me, I'm trying to say this charitably.
It'll be taken charitably.
Okay, thank you. If you've been running in these circles for a long time, like, you've already been exposed to all these ideas, but they're just kind of scattered across various mailing lists and discords and websites and forums. It is actually good to have someone collate them all, put them in a single accessible book, add some other details, add some additional introspection on them, and put it out there into the world for all the non-extropians, transhumanists, rationalists to read about and get a handle on. He's definitely doing valuable work, and it is important work. But as is pointed out, at least in Scott Alexander's review, this is 468 pages. It's a lot. The main thing it does is do a lot of amazing world building, and Scott mentions more than once, like, why was there no awesome piece of fiction in here based on all this? I feel like this is absolutely ripe for that sort of thing. The thing is, every review I've read on this just reminds me of a 5,000-word short story that was published in 2017 and was nominated for a Nebula Award that year. I literally think if you read this story, Utopia LOL is the name of the story. It's written by Jamie Walls. Yeah, it was published by Strange Horizons. It is a fucking amazing story, and you read that, and you get basically everything that's explored in that 468-page tome in a single 5,000-word story that is amazing, that pulls on all your heartstrings, and that explores the subject so well that by the time you're done with it, you're like, I want there to be more stories in this universe. I could read an entire novel in here. But he, like, explored it so well, I'm not sure how much more there is to do right now. It's fantastic. I would recommend anyone who wants to know almost everything that Deep Utopia has to say, but doesn't want to read 468 pages, and instead would like to read an extremely touching, great emotional story that was nominated for one of the biggest awards in sci-fi, to go read Utopia LOL. It is fantastic. Probably Jamie Walls' greatest work.
I remember that when this came out, you wrote a blog post about it, and I thought that you made a compelling point that this, because it's kind of mired in like that era of internet speak, and you're like, this thing will feel obsolete in a couple of years. And luckily, I think it stands the test of time so far. I'm also glad that you called it emotional, because despite sometimes wondering if I'm completely emotionally broken, I'm reminded that I can be easily moved to emotion in the right circumstances by watching or reading just about anything. And this moved me to tears. Like, it was great.
Yeah.
And it's, like you said, 5,000 words. I don't know if it encompasses the entirety of Deep Utopia, but it's a great sampling of here's a possible future. And like you said, if Alexander was wondering why there wasn't fiction in Deep Utopia, probably because it was already 468 pages, but also because he was writing a mass consumption philosophy book, not a fiction, right?
Yeah, that's fair.
So, and this also stands to my general point of, like, every philosophy book I've ever read, or rather every mass consumption philosophy book I've ever read, that the core argument is made in the first several pages, and the next 300 or more are just backing up the main point to make it a book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you're already on board, then you're not really sold by anything in this. There still might be interesting things in there, but you made the point too that there's value in kind of collating the ideas that are out there in various places and putting them all in a place that's accessible. It's important to keep in mind that these ideas are out there and findable and familiar to people like us, but people not like us read super intelligence and will read this book. And so it'll hit a wider audience than the people who are already in the know or in the in-group. And so I think it definitely has value for existing that way. Again, superintelligence didn't teach me anything new. It wasn't written for me. It was written for other people. So I appreciate that this will help maybe sell more people on the glorious transhumanist future, right?
Yeah. People might complain that, like, oh, I could have put that together, but the point isn't putting it together. The point is becoming a PhD in philosophy and getting a tenure position at fucking Oxford and then putting it together. Like, you didn't do those first steps, which is the most important steps in this process.
Yeah, if you're going for public clout, you're
Yeah.
not going to hit the New York Times bestseller list as a rando on the internet, unfortunately.
Right.
A lot
Yeah.
of internet randos should be read more widely, but they just aren't.
Right. He did the hard work of getting the credentials, and none of us wanted to because no one wants to fucking work in those mines for goddamn 8 years.
And he finds stuff in him that he likes. I think he likes his field of work even when he's not writing books. So,
Excellent.
Yeah, he seems like a fun dude.
Yeah. Deep Utopia seems cool, especially for people who aren't familiar with the ideas. Utopia lol, best story of the 20 teens.
Oh man, that's high praise, especially given that MOR also came out in the 20 teens.
Well, I mean, story like short story.
All right, best 5,000 word short story that got a nebula.
Right. The category for short story is less than 7,500 words.
I
so,
see.
Yeah.
Things not known to us non-authors.
Well, there we go. All right, Steven, what's our next piece of feedback?
You did a bonus episode with, I don't know if you ever said his name on, maybe he did.
Delta.
Yeah. It was a lot of fun on basically how we built our Discord community. I only had one nitpick with it, which was that you would use the word harass a few times with how we keep I'll put it this way, how we keep our garden tended. Given the connotation of harassment, I want to just say I don't think we do that. We hassle. We might give a hard time to people with silly opinions, especially if they keep voicing them. We're bristly, but we're not dicks. If I say something egregiously wrong, the awesome people on Discord will point them out in the same terms they would to somebody else who said something egregiously wrong. That's just our culture. I really just wanted to clarify that we are not harassers on the server. We don't go after people. We don't go out of our way to dig up more shit on them and give them a hard time about that. That's what I think of when I think harassment.
We don't go DMing them threats or anything.
Right.
I'm glad you brought that up because it hadn't even occurred to me when I used the word harassment. I was thinking like the early aughts internet forums where if someone says something stupid and you're like, "Lol, no, you idiot," and here's why. And then eventually, if they keep saying stupid things and not like changing their argument, not giving more evidence, then at some point you're just saying, instead of saying "Lol, no, you idiot," here's why, you would say "Lol, no, you idiot," GTFO. Like that kind of replies in public that are kind of rude, but certainly not the same kind of thing we think of with Twitter, where people will DM people just the most vile things and sometimes literally threaten them and send them Google Maps photos of their house or whatever.
Right.
None of that shit.
And if anyone ever did shit like that on our server, we'd kick them out. So,
right. Banned in a second.
Yeah. We do not endorse that sort of behavior, but we do endorse being steadfast in our positions, and you also don't have to agree with it. It just means that you have to be okay with that kind of disagreement, and you're welcome to disagree with them in the same nature right back.
Yeah,
we have people on Discord that we're very fond of that have positions that I might call crazy, but that's part of the fun of us. We have crazy ideas floating around. They're open to being called crazy, just like they're open to calling my not accepting of their ideas crazy.
And I think the most important part is that the hassling, at least when it's done between those of us who have been on here for a long time and know each other, is mostly pretty lighthearted. Hopefully there's some jokes thrown in here and there. It's obviously not like we really dislike you. Sometimes it's like we're exasperated, oh my god, you're such an idiot kind of thing. But it's never like I hate you kind of hassling.
Right.
If it does get to that point, then probably someone needs to take some time away from the computer or maybe get a full-on ban.
Yeah, I think the difference is basically summarized in, we'll very often say your ideas suck, but we don't say you suck. Well, that was the just important qualifier I had for that fun bonus episode that you did.
Excellent. Well, we did ask for some feedback on the quantum stuff in the last episode, and Jan, one of our physics peoples in the Discord, has a quick piece on that. Jan says, with regards to quantum physics, I think outside of physics objects are such a good handle on reality that it makes sense to have a high prior on particles over waves. I think pilot wave theory can explain the initial confusing results of double slit experiments, but it does not work for the new fancy double slit experiments, where particles travel backwards in time according to all theories except many worlds. Jan coming out saying that thinking of particles and waves can work under certain previous regimes, though not the latest ones.
Nice. That's interesting. Does this differ from the Yudkowsky take on quantum physics?
Yes and no. Yudkowsky is pretty much introducing particles and trying to have a duality is stupid because it introduces extra terms that you do not need. And we'll get to that later on. It's very much a keep things simple because why are you introducing more things just to retain your ideas of particles?
The KISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid.
Right. And I think Jan's argument is like, keeping the idea of particles may actually be kind of a good idea on its own, but ultimately still doesn't work due to latest experiments.
Yeah, I think this is the thing for me and maybe others that as a non-physicist and someone who doesn't aspire to be a quantum physicist, me learning about quantum physics and the minutia of this stuff is a lot like me learning about the ecology of Australia 10,000 years ago. Like
Hmm.
it's just like interesting trivia, but it has zero bearing on my real life. This is just maybe another point of this whole sequence is just another emphasis on reductionism. The point is that this is reality, this is how it works, but like that's not how we interact with it or how we need to interact with it unless we're doing quantum physics.
Yeah, I think it really does come down to don't start introducing things that basically would have to be magic to preserve your ideas of how the world was.
Yeah, that, and I think just saying, look, here's something that people say is mysterious, and it's not. It's trying to just drive home the fact that no, mystery is in the mind, not in reality.
If something looks mysterious to you, it's a problem with your model. Part of the dissatisfaction with keeping a mysterious model around is that models aren't supposed to be mysterious, and you're literally doing it wrong if you're introducing new things in order to keep the mysterious model working in the world.
Yeah, agreed.
Anyways, in the last episode, I believe we talked before the sequence post about Jennifer. We were talking about why the sequences had terms like typical mind fallacy when they could have said just something like people think different. We both came out in favor of we actually like the word typical mind fallacy. Jen protested to that point. She said that's not actually what she said. And there's a subtle difference here. She's not saying that you could replace typical mind fallacy with people think different. It's that you could instead say to somebody who seems to be working with a poor model, have you considered that other people don't think the same way that you do? And is not quite the same thing as just saying, dude, people think different, duh.
Well, I didn't know what her exact verbiage was, so all the blame of that lies on you. But
It does.
well, and I think you were making notes after a conversation that you'd had days prior. So if you
Yes.
missed a subtle but important point, I think that's understandable. Yeah, and in every case that I can think of in the last 5 seconds, I can replace any usage of the phrase typical mind fallacy with have you considered that other people don't think the same way you do. I think that phrase encompasses a bit more than typical minding, but it encompasses all of typical minding that I can think
Yeah.
of.
Well, I think a lot of it really does boil down to your audience and knowing your audience. Probably for a lot of people saying, have you considered that other people don't think the same way you do when they're in the middle of committing the typical mind fallacy would help them and, slow them down and make them reconsider and let them approach the world in a more charitable way, perhaps just switch to a better model of people in general. Whereas I think for an audience of people like us, of rationalists, saying you're committing the typical mind fallacy is a much better way of saying that. We would actually react better to that than have you considered that other people don't think the same way you do. It's much more vibes based, feelings based kind of thing. Whereas typical mind fallacy is much more systemic. Here is a problem we have identified. Here is once you've read the essay and understand the working behind it, you just have this quick, easy handle to use that makes your life much simpler. It just shows two different ways that two different populations interact with the rest of the world. Some people would say that the people who use typical mind fallacy are being very robotic and Spock-like or whatever because they like having a systematized observation and a mental handle to use for that. And the people who think more of other people as everyone's their own person that doesn't think exactly the same way as being more in tune with humanity and thus less robotic. But maybe that's fair to call it more robotic, but also that's fine. There's different types of people out there, and it's good for the more Spock inclined among us to have a way to talk and to relate to reality as well. And that is one of the things that the sequences gave us.
I think that's a good way to put it. If I'm going to be at a Halloween party tomorrow night, I if someone says something, some general sweeping statement, I won't say, your typical minding, but I might say, have you considered that the people that you disagree with just aren't thinking about this the same way that you are? And that'll be a more valuable way to deliver it to them rather than give them a crash course on the shorthand handle there. So I think it just would resonate like on a better emotional level if someone says, you know what, I haven't actually thought what it's like to be those other people. Let me reconsider this. So I think that is a good way to put it.
One other thing came to me. When we say typical mind fallacy, that phrase compresses a lot of work, which we did when we internalized that part of the sequences. Saying the phrase, have you considered other people may not think the same way as you, that's asking the other person to do new work right there in the moment. They got to stop, they have to consider, and it's actually a big ask. That's why I think of it as a hippie thing, because hippies are really happy to stop and really explore these things, even if it means they spend like the next hour talking and thinking and feeling. That's just what they like to do. The thing is, they'll have to do that again every time this ask is made, but again, every time they're happy to, because maybe it's a slightly different issue or it's different people they're talking to. Like the circumstances are always unique, right?
Yes, and some circumstances are more time constrained. Where like there have been times where I've just decided to skip a conversation because I didn't have the 15 requisite minutes it would take to cross that inferential gap.
Yeah, exactly. It's really very holistic and connective, and it puts you in touch with the emotions of the people around you. But like you say, on the other hand, nobody's got time for that shit. Like, I mean, sometimes we do, but not all the time.
Right.
When we use that handle, like on the one hand, it's a demand for that you have pre-done work. You have to have already sat down and really worked through the sequence posts on your own and did all the churning and thinking and fitting it into your brain. And that's like several hours of reading through a treatise meant for people who are at least 1 sigma above the standard in intelligence, right?
Yeah, I mean, a few hours is a nice way to put it. If you're reading all the sequences, it might take substantially longer. So.
Oh yeah. But just that one portion of the sequences will be at least a few hours.
Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah.
And to get up to the point of the typical mind fallacy, probably.
Right.
Afterwards, we now have the structure in our heads for this class of problem, and it's got a really handy phrase for us to call it up, the typical mind fallacy. It's worth, long term, all that effort if what you want to do is solve things and fix systems. Instead of connecting to every individual person you interact with. It's a lot like programming in that it can take you days to program something that normally only takes you 5 minutes to do in the course of your day, but in the long run, it saves you a lot of freaking time.
Yeah.
So I guess the longer method of have you considered, that's really connecting to individual people, and it helps you really model the people you're talking to, but it trades off on being able to do things quickly and to have shared systemic knowledge. So they're both good, but very different, and they approach this trade-off in different ways on a pretty fundamental level. I like having that systemized handle in my head that I can use with other people that also have it.
Totally. Running with your programming analogy, to anyone who does a little bit of programming, they'll use libraries. So rather than write your functions from scratch, you can import library from and do whatever work you need to do. That to me is like a lot of what the sequences foundation lays is, I mean, well, it's not the best analogy because you don't really have to know how your library works. If you're programming, you just need to know what it does. But this is like writing your own library and then using that going forward rather than rewriting all that work from scratch during every conversation. And it's a huge time saver and a huge boon. And because I know you won't plug it because you don't often plug your own stuff, there's a fun and not too far tangentially related post on deathisbad.substack.com called The Rationalist Canon, Pope versus Caliph, Round 1, where you compare and contrast Eliezer and Scott Alexander's writing approaches. And I loved it. I thought it was a lot of fun. And I think he made really good points about the strengths and weaknesses of both. No, I think you made a great point. I appreciate the clarification.
Oh, well, thank you. And I think that the post-rats are trying to get back to some of that relating directly to people level that the hippies are doing, but without losing the original system understanding of typical mind fallacy, right? Which I think this is probably a very valuable thing because it's good to have both if you can have both. But also, this is why no one who wasn't a rationalist first can rightly call themselves a post-rat, in my opinion. So, yeah, you guys need to come up with some other name other than post-rat.
I agree. I think that it'd be weird to identify as post something if you were never that something. To me, it's kind of like the difference between, like a public science communicator like Neil deGrasse Tyson writing a book or giving an explanation to something versus him working with his colleagues to solve a problem. They serve two very different functions, two very important functions, but you can't do whatever frontier science at the speed that you would communicate that to a layperson. You have to have all that shared bedrock and foundation to build on, just for the sake of brevity, if nothing else.
Yeah. But that being said, trying to unite the two schools of thought, like Harry Potter uniting both science and magic, would be awesome.
Totally agree.
So the second to last piece of feedback is basically a mea culpa from me, where I want to step back a little bit on what I said last episode and also apologize. I was a little bit put into a defiant, defensive mood, headspace by some of the things we had been talking about. And so by the time we got to philosophers, I was like, you know what? I'm already grumpy at philosophers. I think they don't do very much. Fuck those guys. and and I went a bit overboard on saying how useless they are. I do still think that most of modern philosophy doesn't do much of anything at all. But I was over vigorous in that point. I shouldn't shit on Bostrom. He's one of us. He does legit good work bringing this out to the other people. And I shouldn't have dismissed the philosophers in general of even the recent past of not contributing very much, because there was a lot of people in the Discord who was like, now hold on a second. You try to talk all of moral progress being mainly material wealth progress. And sure, that helped a whole lot, but the philosophers really did change things a lot during the Enlightenment. People just keep forgetting and underestimating how just mean people were on a basic level before the Enlightenment. How they would put cats in bags and set them on fire for entertainment. Not just because they were bad people. As Liam pointed out in the Discord, it's not that they were bad people. It's just that as a society, we cared about completely different sets of things. Things like how other entities felt were not the things of value that we were optimizing for. That makes a big difference. We just had a completely different paradigm, and the philosophers really helped change that and brought our focus around to the things that we care about today. So it wasn't just progress in materials and prosperity. It was also legit moral progress that was driven by some of the philosophers doing that work. So I'm taking a step back and I'm saying, all right, philosophers have been handy throughout all of human history. Even some modern ones are pretty decent, and I overstepped.
Well, I think that's a fair summary. Yeah, I wish that when the ethics thing didn't land, I should have just thought of other good examples. The idea of libertarianism, like not the political party precisely, but
Yeah.
John Stuart Mill's On Liberty, the Enlightenment itself. Those are examples that came out of philosophy that changed the world for the better in immense ways. They didn't come out of the result of whatever experimentation and stuff. The other little bonus thing I was going to throw in there was that you had said that the fundamental attribution error was to you like this super obvious thing that you can't that you thought someone just made up just to get their name in a book. I'm paraphrasing, but it seemed that is that a close enough to fair summary?
So the fundamental attribution error is thinking that something is core to someone rather than determined by their circumstances, right? And I just didn't think that people really did that it was kind of a made up thing, that you look at somebody and you're like, wow, they must be having a bad day. Or, oh, like, hey, he's really happy. He must be having a great day. I assumed that was the default of how people always act. And so the fundamental attribution error seemed like it was a made up thing to me that people don't actually do.
I loved this. And the reason I brought it up was because there's an example brought up in the Discord, like, somebody who breaks their controller when they're playing a game or something because they get mad.
Yeah.
And you would say, well, I think, and tell me if I'm paraphrasing this wrong from memory, that I think I would conclude reasonably that they have some sort of deficit. It's like, it's not just that they're, so, all right, if that's the case, I just want to point out that I don't know if I'm sure I've broken a remote or something, but I remember at least once in my teens, the horrible hormone years of puberty, I crushed my phone in my hands. Like I was having a bad day or something. I don't know what pissed me off, right? But like I think the me of then was definitely deficient, but I've done behaviors that seen in isolation would look like an angry person with problem, but that's just me on a bad day or in a bad moment. I think that's what the fundamental attribution error is that to generalize from a behavior, and granted, some behavior can be so egregious that it's safe to generalize. I think something like a calculated murder falls under that category, right? Maybe any murder in general, actually. I'm trying to think of what it was recently. I definitely got mad enough at something this week to throw something across the room.
Why?
I was laid off last month, been looking for a job,
No, but why throw something across the room?
I knew it was the stupid thing to do. I did it as a cathartic release. And it was something small that couldn't break anything that if I hit it. I have these old empty, pill containers that I use for portable.
All right, so if you're that considerate about it and you're doing it because the motion itself is going to help you feel better, I don't think that's bad.
But see, I know that in my mind why I'm doing it. The observer wouldn't.
I don't know. If it's something fluffy. The thing is, like, I've been playing video games since I was, what, 6, 7 maybe? These controllers, I understand if I throw one, there's a chance that it gets damaged. And if it gets damaged, I can't play the video game anymore.
Right.
And so I've never thrown a controller, and I've seen other people do it. And it boggles me as like, what are you possibly thinking? And, the answer is they aren't thinking. And in that case, I don't think it's a fundamental attribution error. I think it's a fundamental attribution correct assessment. because if someone loses control to the point where they will damage their own future happiness for, I don't know, because they lost control of emotions for over a video game, it seems it's crazy to me. I've certainly made bad decisions before, but like that, if I saw someone doing that, I would think this person may be dangerous to be around if they get into an emotionally heightened state. That seems less like an error and more like a correct assessment.
Huh. I mean, I guess I'm wondering how to square that with my own self-assessment that I'm not a dangerous person to be around even when angry.
Well, if you only throw light things that can't damage anything and won't cost you money, then that's probably correct, right?
Well, again, the behavior viewed in isolation, you might think, oh, well, that's just the closest thing you had by hand, or hit at the right angle, it could still cause damage to somebody or something, right? Like, it's never the smart and reasonable thing to do. Like, I don't know.
Sure.
Have you ever punched a wall in frustration?
I'm going to say no. I've punched things to release like bad feelings, but not where I lost control of myself.
I see. Yeah, I guess I can't remember the last time if it was just a cathart or if it was overwhelmed emotion. But I'm trying not to like pat myself on the back. But I've been compared favorably to Ted Lasso and Fred Rogers, and those are some of the nicest things people have ever said about me. And
Hell yeah.
and I'm also the kind of person who, under the right circumstances, will throw something out of annoyance.
I don't want to pretend like I'm a saint. I've done bad things before, especially on alcohol, because, that lowers your control. But I've made some bad decisions before that probably were a bad decision. But the only time where I was really absolutely out of control, where I could have done things that would have drastically affected my life, was at a time where someone had threatened someone I love with murder. Probably nothing would have happened because, usually nothing actually happens. But I was so enraged that I got lost going home on the straight line path that I always take from work to home. It was absolutely crazy. In retrospect, like, how did that possibly happen? How did I lose my way? But it's just because like my large parts of my brain shut down. So it's not that there's nothing that can get me to lose control like that, but at the very least, it was something really fucking important as opposed to a video game.
Yeah, I think specifically of like trivial dumb things. I guess I'm just kind of thinking of like, if it's true that I'm a nice person, as people have said, I think it would be wrong to ascribe deep personality traits about me seeing some behaviors in isolation, even if those behaviors are indicative, they're evidence of, an unhinged moron who breaks their stuff, right? I'll totally own that, but I don't think it's I think it would be committing the fundamental attribution error to say I now therefore know something deep about this person's personality.
There's a lot of context, and in most cases, you aren't in that position.
Yeah. I guess at the bottom of this, what I was going to ask was, does this update your position about me in the direction of like, Steven's more unhinged than I thought he was, learning these things about him, and maybe I should be more on guard about him? Or does it update you that maybe there is something to this whole fundamental attribution error thing? Or is it a bit of both or neither?
I don't know. I think it more updates me to people get irrationally invested in things like video games in a way that it's hard for me to understand.
Have you ever played like an online multiplayer shooter with like lag?
Oh God, it's so frustrating.
It's frustrating, right?
Yeah, it'll ruin your evening. But
totally, I can't remember the last time I yelled at my TV, but I remember doing it because I had to explain the behavior to somebody. They're like, "What the hell are you yelling about?" And I was like, "You don't understand. I shot the guy, but then he shot me. But it was after I shot him, and I died. It's not fair. Like, it's all stupid, right?"
Yeah.
But in the moment of games, that's how it works. Games are a fun thing to talked about a lot, I think, in Deep Utopia. Where do we find meaning if not in work or providing food for our family and stuff? Well, we already find lots of meaning in stuff that doesn't matter, like games. We make them matter by caring about them. But anyway, thanks for indulging me.
Oh yeah, absolutely. All right, shall we get on to the main topic?
Yeah, we're going to start here with a post from this niche blog that, it's out there and people should be more aware of. It's called deathisbad.substack.com by Eneasz Brodsky. Yeah, that name sounds familiar.
I figured this was a guy that we could get on the podcast without too much arm twisting.
Yeah, there's a great post that's recent on there called Shrimp Welfare Watches Eat the EA Gates. Do you want to tell us a bit about what this is about?
Okay. Well, I think didn't we talk in an episode or two ago here about Dungeons and Dragons? No, I think that was actually the bonus episode with Delta.
Yes, I think it might have been.
For people who didn't hear that part or who didn't listen to it, the really brief summary is that Dungeons and Dragons used to be a game for the nerds of society. We are the guys who hung out in basements, didn't talk to girls. We wore thick glasses and we hung around and threw dice and talked about how awesome it would be to be, a dark elf or a dude wielding an awesome magic sword. It was for us. It was where we hung out. We knew that other people who played D&D, we could get along with them. We had similar life experiences in terms of getting made fun of for things, social anxiety and awkwardness. The non-nerds just didn't play this game, and they would make fun of us for playing it. They'd be like, oh, look, you're going to go run off and be an elf and affect the stupid nerd voice. Let's go throw some dice, guys. It was a thing that kept them away and that they made fun of us for, and we loved it anyway, and we had a great time doing it.
I didn't want to interrupt, but I wanted to kind of just give the overview of what the post was about. And this was a great case example. The post is basically that sub communities, or I guess niche communities, have bulwarks against wide adoption.
They should, at any rate, yeah.
Right. Well, if they don't, then they're not niche, right? The example of D&D here I loved, and I want you to finish up with it. But the general principle that there's something that the niche community has to protect itself from being assimilated by modern culture or by everybody else.
Yeah. Or there should be something like that for every niche subculture.
We'll explore that a bit. The should.
Okay. What happened is that D&D just started getting more popular over time because it actually is a pretty fun game. Some people trace this back to the beginning of Critical Role. I'm not sure. I think it started even before that, and Critical Role was just near the frontier of exploiting this. Dungeons & Dragons became more popular. It spread out to more people. The nerds would get their friends to do it when they could, the ones that were not quite nerdy, but still kind of nerdy. So it started spreading to more people, and the rules changed over time to accommodate these more people. They've kept changing. At this point, the game is there to serve a different market, which I guess is fine because it's great for other people to enjoy things. I don't want to take away games from anybody. And it's certainly great for the game publishing company because they're making so much more money selling to like a wide audience rather than just to some socially rejected nerds in a basement somewhere. But what it's done is it has kind of taken away the game from the original nerd set. Like, the rules will change who the game attracts and who likes the game. The original focus on the rules was much more something that would be appealing to the kind of people who love Lord of the Rings, who want to spend time in universes like this and play as those characters and explore a world that works as much as it can and is cohesive and tells the sorts of stories that they're interested in hearing. And the new rule set is antithetical to that. Anyone who wants that sort of thing is going to be repulsed by this rule set, and instead it draws in the kind of people who like to roleplay completely different things. This is a bad thing, in my opinion, because now that subgroup of nerds who had a thing that united them and that they were excited about don't have that anymore. It started slowly by the game becoming more and more appealing to the mainstream, to people with a different neuroarchitecture, to the kinds of people who would say the feely empathic human things rather than you're committing the typical mind fallacy. And I love those people. I don't want to say bad things about those people, but they want different games and different things than the super nerds do. As a result, the thing that a super nerds had where they knew they could go and everyone would be like them, that doesn't exist anymore. My contention was that if they had clung to those original rules, a person from the larger monoculture just doesn't particularly like it. It restricts them in ways they don't like. It restricts the nerds in ways that they do like. And so it would keep out the wider audience and keep it more for the people who like this sort of thing. If they had literally repelled the other people with these rule sets that are problematic or uncomfortable or just make the game a way that the wider audience does not like to play, then they would still have the thing. This is an important thing to hold on to. We need to have all our little sub places holding onto things that will make them repellent to the broader culture, because the broader culture is so fucking big and has so much money that if a publisher, if anyone can appeal to the broader culture, they will do so, and the broader culture will absolutely take over the thing that was for a subgroup, and then the subgroup just won't have it anymore. And they'll have to go somewhere else and start all over again from scratch. And that kind of sucks. I dislike the large culture coming in and taking things from small subgroups and making it their own. This can sometimes happen in goth clubs too. I think it's one of the reasons it's important to continue a norm of most people in the goth club should be wearing black clothes, maybe like some eyeliner or something, but visibly trying to make a go at the aesthetic. If you're just hanging out in your jersey and your baseball cap, then you should feel uncomfortable, and we maybe even should be asking you to leave if it gets past a certain small critical number of people, because then it just turns into yet another club, and the goth people don't want to go there anymore.
Yeah, the example of the goth club is illustrative. I mean, it has its aesthetic, it has its vibe. If you just start letting anyone in, that vanishes.
Yeah.
Like I said, then it's just a club. And it's like, but this used to be a goth club. And after a critical mass of non-goth attendees, that just changes.
Yeah. And I don't know if people know this, but the majority of goths they're not like cool. They're nerds often. They're autistic. They have some other issues going on. Like, goths are a great way to meet other socially weird people that like to talk about other nerdy things. It's a great place for rationalists, honestly, to fit in. If rationalists are looking to do something with a bit more music and vibes to it, that's the sort of people you will find there.
I have a couple questions about D&D that may relate. So, like, there exists a rule set when it was less accessible, more niche,
Yes.
right? Some
Yeah.
people just still play that way, right? I thought that some people said, hey, we're playing D&D version 3 rule set or something. Is that not a thing that happens?
I think there are actually some people who do that.
Now it's harder to find because it's got more wide accessibility, but there is still the sub niche of D&D players who are sticking at old school.
Yeah, you can probably still find a 3rd edition game going somewhere. It's harder.
Gotcha. I think the fact that there's a remnant that hangs around is valuable and illustrative. I also liked at the end of your first section, you said, the new rules are repellent to the turbo nerds who read Lord of the Rings 10 times. And It makes me think, like, someone who liked Lord of the Rings in 1999 was a nerd.
Yeah.
Someone who liked it in 2001 was mainstream.
Right.
The Fellowship of the Ring had come out. It was the best movie ever. And, among the best. It just gained wide popularity. In that case, it's hard to see how it's a bad thing. It took Lord of the Rings away from the nerds and gave it to everybody. So I guess if I'd had it taken away from me, then I might have felt bad. But, like, the incentives behind, like, since nerds invented D&D, but it wasn't owned by the players. It was owned by a company. And they're like, well, we can get more people to play this game if we make it more accessible. Yeah. So the incentive structure was such that was inevitable, right?
Right.
That inevitability doesn't necessarily apply to every subculture because not all of them are business based.
Yes.
That particular avenue to failure / dilution, isn't a problem for every subculture.
It's always a potential problem because everyone wants to be more popular and to get more support and to get more people in their group. Maybe it's not as tempting for other types of people. Like, apparently the Jews just do not want more people converting to Judaism, which is pretty fucking based on, now that I think about it. The general instinct is the more people that are in on our thing, the stronger we are, the more friends we have, the more everything is better. My contention is, like, actually, I think the opposite is the case. The more people you have in your thing, the less it becomes what it was. The less it serves the people who originally were really helped by it, because it becomes diluted. It becomes something that caters to a large mass audience, and so has to become more bland rather than specifically working for some specific people.
Awesome. This is going to tie so well into the next point here, or the next really the thrust of this blog post. But as a quick aside, I think that it's totally possible to convert to Judaism.
It's possible, but it's really hard.
Yeah, you have to attend classes and pass tests and stuff.
Yeah.
What they don't do is they don't proselytize.
Right. Converting to Christianity is so much easier than converting to
You just have to
Judaism.
accept Jesus into your heart, man.
Yeah. Just come to church a bunch and accept Jesus.
I think if you're canonical enough about it, all you have to do is just think it privately, actually.
Right?
But
and I think that's a very apt analogy, because all you have to do to play D&D now is to show up at a place, and oftentimes you don't even need to know the rules. They'll, like, tell you the basic rules and hand you a player sheet, and you can join in. Anyone from the street can walk in and join a game. In some regards, that's great, but the old school D&D was much more like Judaism, where when I tried to join a group, they grilled me first. They were like, "Oh, you want to play with us? Do you actually know what a THAC0 is? Do you know what the range of the armor classes is? Like, what is the natural unmodified minimum maximum stats? What does 2d8 mean even? Like, you had to know some things before people would accept you, and if you passed the test and they were like, all right, you can roll with us, we'll see how this goes.
You can roll with us is almost a pun. Actually, it's definitely a pun if you mean
Oh,
it that way.
I did not mean it that way because I hate puns.
I know. I loved that section of this. I had no idea that there was, I mean, at least in your case, an interview process that you could have failed before joining this group.
Yeah.
I figured that if you had expressed interest and said I want to learn, they would have accepted you. But no, they wanted to interview you first. I think that's interesting.
All right. If you want to learn, fucking go to a game store, buy yourself the rule book, read through it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you want to jump straight to how this relates to EA?
So there's the intermediate step where you can't keep the normies out because they're too big. Maybe the normies is a bad term. The monoculture, the massive people with their massive purchasing power that make up the overwhelming majority of, I was going to say Americans, but let's face it, like just the Western world, right? If they want in on something, they're going to get in on it because they are an irresistible flood. The only way to defend yourself against them is to make them not want to join you, to make them look at you and cringe away because, like, ew, I don't want to join that. That is what the nerds had way back in the 90s and early aughts before the Lord of the Rings movie came out, as you aptly point out, where this was a thing that like turbo dorks that wore glasses and were pimply would do. And why would we want to be associated with them?
Yeah, anyone talking about dragons and stuff back then was a nerd. And then everyone was watching Game of Thrones, you know?
Yeah, exactly. You didn't want to be associated with those people. And then, oh, actually, this is cool. We don't mind being associated with these things. That was the downfall. My contention is that any subculture that wants to stay safe for the people that it is serving needs to have some kind of cringe gate to keep away the monoculture, that when they look at it, they'll be like, that's kind of weird. I don't get it. I don't think I want to go over there. That is what shrimp welfare does, in my opinion, for EA, for effective altruism. People look at effective altruism and they're like, okay, so they seem to do all these cool things. And yeah, okay, they're a bit Spock-like. They're really focused on numbers and whatever, but there's a whole movement going here. They seem to have some things figured out. We should maybe get in on this as well. And then they run into the people who are like, but you know what really matters? Sure, there's malaria, there's human suffering, there's the potential extinction of our species, but let's not forget about the shrimp, man. Shrimp got feelings too. We can't be hurting the shrimp. You know how many shrimp we hurt every day? And like, they're serious about this. And for a while, I was like, I love all my EA brethren. I'm not going to like discriminate against them. If shrimp is their thing, that's great. They're keeping us honest. But boy, wow, can you believe this shrimp welfare thing? Who gives a damn about freaking shrimp? But now I think that they are, in fact, a very important and integral part of EA, specifically because when normal people look over at EA and see that one of the things that they really seem to care about is reducing the suffering of shrimp, they're going to be like, this is too weird. I'm stepping away until they get the shrimp thing out of here. That's good. That is our cringe gate, or I shouldn't say our because I'm not an effective altruist myself, but that is the EA cringe gate, that the shrimp welfare people are serious about it. They aren't doing it as a lark. They really believe this. And as long as they are part of the movement and not sidelined somewhere, they will keep out the monoculture from coming in and taking it over and turning it from a philosophy for nerdy analytical Spock-like nerds that want to do good things into just another feel-good charity for the normies. So I think it's really important that shrimp welfare stays around. Otherwise, in 5 years, the whole movement could be co-opted and taken over. And then the people who actually care about being effective with their money and finding the neglected cause areas that you can save a lot of lives with just a few $1,000s are going to have to fucking start all over again. Find some new term, some new forum to gather under, begin the process from scratch, because the old process will have been completely taken over by people who are now diverting a lot of money into, oh, but what about sad puppies with rare diseases? And what about breast cancer? What about making sure that fascists don't get elected, where fascist is defined by whoever's in the party they disfavor? The movement would quickly stop being EA, and that is why I think it's important to keep out those sorts of people. And the best way to do that. The only way to do that is to repel them from the beginning through things like shrimp welfare, because there's too many of them, and if they want to take over something, they will.
Awesomely put. And there was something in there that you didn't put in the post because I had a point of like actual substantive disagreement, but I think you kind of addressed it in what you just said. But so you said that the people served by EA would be hindered by wider adoption by broad culture.
Mm-hmm.
On its face, that statement just rings false. The people being served by EA aren't the effective altruists. It's the people or other beings they're helping. So like,
Oh,
if I think of it that way, I like to think of myself as an effective altruist. I don't give the requisite amount of money, but I give money to effective charities deliberately every month.
mm-hmm.
I think that they're doing the right thing broadly. So I don't know if Kamala Harris started talking about GiveWell and the Against Malaria Foundation and stuff. I think that'd be a great thing. I don't know where that would actually go wrong if the idea that, hey, maybe instead of making money for so my favorite example was Celebrity Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Anderson Cooper was on, and he was playing for a charity that makes bulletproof vests for police dogs.
Yeah.
And I think I mentioned this before because I think I remember caveating. I probably love dogs more than the person hearing this. And yet, I rolled my eyes so hard they haven't finished unrolling yet from the years ago that I saw this because of the ways to spend $1 million to be helpful. I can scarcely think of something less useful to give it to. Just give it to animal shelters. You'll be helping more dogs that way, right? Even if you aren't going to go full EA and give it to the best world charities, like if what you care about is dog welfare, there are better ways to do it than to give bulletproof vests to a tiny minority of dogs, right? God damn, that still grinds my gears. Anyway, so my point being that wider adoption of actual effective altruism, not just that like people giving money, but people giving money well, that would make the world a better place.
Wider adoption among people who are already EA inclined. Like if other people who are EA at heart find out about these things and join, that's great. But wider adoption in like people like Anderson Cooper come and join the movement is going to kill EA because the values will be corrupted. Like Anderson Cooper wants I'm going to go out on a limb here and just use him as a stock caricature, right? Anderson Cooper wants bulletproof vests for police dogs, and he doesn't particularly care about malaria nets. And so when he joins EA, he and his people will slowly over time start changing the culture and the things that they consider important and where research money goes to favor things like bulletproof vests for police dogs and disfavor things like malaria nets. That is the problem with letting the monoculture into anything that has goals that are different from what the monoculture has. And the monoculture, as we know, never particularly cared about malaria nets because they were not focused on that issue before, and they still aren't focused on that issue now. EA will change to adopt their norms, not the other way around.
You think so?
Yes, if it gets adopted by enough people that are not EA at heart, yes, absolutely, because there's so many more of them and they have a lot more power.
Well, I guess they might be able to like try and steal the brand. Is that what you're thinking that what would happen? Because like
not steal the brand any more than D&D was stolen, because it wasn't. It just had a lot more people move into it to where the people that wanted something different outnumbered the people that had been there before.
But they also literally changed the rules.
Yeah. And they would literally change where the money goes in EA.
I don't think so. Maybe we'll have to get somebody from, I don't know, the effective altruism community or a major organization proper to weigh in on this. But I would think that if we got enough Anderson Coopers jumping in to give money to silly causes, they would just be told over and over, you guys are doing it wrong. We care about big things with large impact.
Why should the Anderson Coopers that outnumber everyone 10 to 1 care about other people telling them that they're doing things wrong?
Well, it's that they won't be welcomed into the effective altruism circles, right?
Why should they care about being welcomed when they are 9/10 of the circles themselves?
I guess they wouldn't be effective altruists. So, like, to the extent that the label has any meaning and that these organizations exist, the organizations like GiveWell will never put bulletproof dog vest at the top of its list, no matter how much money and how many celebrities want that.
That is my point, though. They wouldn't be effective altruists, but they would be working in the effective altruist organizations. They would be taking positions in them, first in low levels and then in higher up levels over time. In our reckoning, they're not effective altruists. Just like in our reckoning, a lot of modern D&D players are not the nerds, and yet they control everything, and the people who are left don't have control of the organizations that they created anymore. We've literally seen this happen to. I'm going to beep out the exact name, but we saw this happen to. It was made for a certain type of people, and it got popular enough that other people came in and took the space and slowly became mods and got power. Then took the space over to where the original people were like, "I guess I'm just going to leave and maybe start over somewhere else because the people I want to talk to and interact with aren't here anymore."
That seems like a much more deliberate effort, though, coming in and taking over the culture by getting a job in the industry or in the community, and then working your way up the chain of command until you can start calling the shots.
It's not done intentionally to take the place over. It's done because like this is a group I want to be part of and I'm, volunteering, and as I'm volunteering, my things that I care about are going to become more important to the group overall.
Okay, I think I see what you're saying then. And it wouldn't just be the things that they care about, but they might be whatever socially pressured by the monoculture to adopt more palatable areas of concern.
I'm saying that they are the monoculture. So when they take those volunteering positions, they will push more of the things they're interested in just because they're interested in them.
Hmm.
Like there's no nefarious plot. There's just misaligned values.
I see what you're saying. I guess let me put that on the back burner for a minute while I ponder that. And let's talk about shrimp welfare for a second, because I love the example you give here. For what it's worth, I care about shrimp welfare. I did some
Okay.
searching after reading this post, and
Mhm.
they exhibit behaviors that suggest, and they have the neural and physiological architecture for pain processing. They seem, for all intents and purposes, capable of feeling pain. To me, that seems settled. The debate really seems to be about like, well, is that pain bad? Not do they feel pain, but if someone already thinks that pain is bad, then you're already on board. This is what makes it a fun thing to try to sell to somebody who's not in this sphere of thinking already, is they might look at this and be like, well, okay, sure, maybe shrimp feel pain, but they're not conscious of it. So like, why is it bad? For me, and I do think that that's where the actual crux is like, is pain that exists basically in a vacuum a negative thing? I think it is. The easiest way for me to put it would be like if we had a world of just shrimp suffering as maximally as they could, that would be worse
Mhm.
than a world with nothing on it.
Yes, certainly.
Yeah. So, I mean, if that's the case, then shrimp welfare matters. I think it matters less than many other things because I think the capacity of that suffering is smaller. I would want to solve factory farming before I started really caring about shrimp.
Yeah.
So this is the cringe gate, as you called it, and I liked that. Someone who thinks they want to get into this kind of new hip and trendy EA thing will think it looks attractive, and then they're like, oh, there's people here care about shrimp and electrons. This is nuts. I'm out.
Yeah.
Electrons, I think, is where I draw the line.
Okay.
But well, I think I would draw it at anything without a brain. But
Okay.
I'm open to the best argument in favor of electron suffering, but I'd also be open to the best fucking option that we have to do anything about it.
Mhm.
But the idea that having this cringe gate keeps the normies, quote unquote, out is a valuable barrier against that kind of just subsuming into monoculture. Is that the way you'd put it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. I don't think I had a real question there, other than I just liked the example that you gave, and I don't think that it's a bad one. I think that if I've said anything that a true shrimp welfare advocate disagrees with, let me know. But
Oh, okay.
yeah, I wasn't going for like a gotcha or ask you a tough question.
Yeah. One of the most important things EA can do to keep itself EA is to keep the shrimp welfare thing, keep taking it seriously. Like, keep those people part of the conversation.
Do you think they're right? Now I'm asking you a question.
The shrimp welfare people?
Yeah.
No.
No.
Once we've solved so many other things, maybe shrimp welfare could be something that we might look into, but that's so far in the future that I do not think it is effective at all use of money.
I think I 90% agree with you. This is not where I'm going to put my efforts or my money. Like I said, there are other pressing concerns, but when we've solved those, this is on the list. It's just near the bottom.
Right.
It's somewhere below factory farmed chickens and somewhere above bulletproof vests for dogs.
I'm not even sure if it's above bulletproof vests for dogs for me.
I mean, I think for me, it's just a straight numbers thing. Like even if one shrimp counts for 1/1,000,000th of a dog, given the number of police dogs there are and the number of shrimp there are, then yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, I would happily set 100 shrimp on fire myself to save a dog. But that's just more because we bred dogs to
Be awesome.
to be awesome and perfect, and give their little expressive faces, and that we can read, and we can read their emotions, and they can read ours. And you don't get any of that from shrimp. But again, you do get all these kind of these sad and existent behaviors that, again, they have the physical systems in place for nociceptors or something. The architecture involved in pain processing.
Okay.
They even produce opioids, like the natural pain killing substances that we have in our brains when they're in pain, or when we have reason to believe they would be.
Right.
And then you can do things like shock them and see if they leave and stuff like that. And they do. They give every indication other than saying "ow, stop" that they can feel pain.
I have absolutely no doubt at all that this biological mechanism has the ability to sense things that are, damaging and unpleasant.
Right. The question is that actually bad because they're not aware of it? And this is really fun. If anyone hasn't used, I would be amazed if anyone listening hasn't used Claude. Actually, I know at least one person who's listening who hasn't. So try it out. Try a random philosophical question you're just tossing around. I was doing that with this, and it tends to ask such good follow-up questions. It asked me, what is your view on unconscious suffering? Do you think consciousness is necessary for something to matter morally? It asked me that.
It's pretty good.
It's a very thought-provoking question, and we're having a philosophical discussion. This is the perfect way to keep it going. It was awesome.
Yeah. So good job, Claude.
Yeah, Claude nailed it, and it's a great way to have these discussions if you don't have someone who wants to have them with you at the moment, or prepare for a podcast episode.
Awesome. Well, I had one final thing about this because I figured there wasn't like a whole episode to talk about with the shrimp boil for watching the EA Gates, although I do think that's very important, and I'm glad they're doing it. I wanted to tie this into Robin Hanson's recent posts about cultural drift. Have you been exposed to these at all?
I read this one. He links to one that was paywalled, so I didn't read that one. But I'm familiar with the phenomena of cultural drift. Yeah, we've talked about it a bit on the show. I think we talked about it with the Collinses as well, some. But that wasn't the point of the episode, but we talked about it a bit there.
Can I briefly summarize Robin Hanson's worries?
No.
Damn it. All right. Well, good episode, Stephen.
Later. Yeah.
Let's move on to the less wrong posts.
No, man. Yeah, dive into it. Hanson, as always, has an awesome take. An awesomely interesting take, at the very, very least. That can be said about all of his takes.
Yeah. Cultural drift being that culture is changing, and it's changing increasingly rapidly, and there is no mechanisms for feedback like there used to be, so we don't know if it's changing in good ways or bad ways. On average, most changes are bad, so we should expect culture to be getting less adaptive over time. The thing that worries Hanson a lot is that there used to be many competing cultures, and cultures would learn from each other. They would adopt the best bits, they would abandon the worst bits, or they would just completely go extinct. The more adaptive cultures would come in, take their place, and continue to, splinter and become multitudes. And this was a good thing.
An easy way to illustrate that point is think of cultures that embraced technological advances and ones that didn't.
Right.
And then look at the cultures that are around now. The ones that liked the new weapons are the cultures that made it.
Yes. And that this is a good thing because it keeps things anti-fragile. It keeps us trying lots of new things and replacing the ones that don't work with the ones that do work. The serious problem nowadays, as he sees it, and as many people see it, is that we don't have multiple cultures anymore. Not entirely true, but let's say that in the West, among Western democracies, there is mainly just one monoculture that controls almost everything. We all believe more or less the same things, and it spreads to so many things. Like among all the Western countries, everyone is basically listening to the same kind of music. We're seeing the same movies. We believe the same things about gay people, about how governments should be run via the will of the people through elections. Cultures have all been subsumed into one big monoculture. This is extremely bad because if a culture has some sort of flaw in it that, for example, prevents people from having children at replacement rates, then the culture quickly declines and collapses. And previously, there were other cultures to come in and fill the gaps. Could be for a long time, we're not going to have something like that. Having just one big culture with a flaw that we can't see that comes to light later is really dangerous. Hanson's worry right now is that there's nothing we have to combat this. He's like, how do we fix the monoculture problem? The answer, as far as I can see that he's come to, is I don't fucking know. I guess we don't.
Yeah.
There's fuck all we can do about it.
I liked that, as bummer as it is, I liked that part of the post. And you mentioned too, like there's one major monoculture across the Western world. I think it's important to highlight that despite the vast differences that many people will point out between, say, like the political left and the political right, they share almost every value.
Yeah.
They disagree on a handful of important ones to them, but
Yeah.
neither of them are saying we should start killing people we disagree with again, right?
Right.
Like none of them are pre-enlightenment.
None of them are saying that human happiness doesn't matter.
They just have different views on how to get there.
Yeah.
It's one major dominant thing. On the plus side, it's pretty good since it's a child of the Enlightenment, and we've got or I guess a descendant of the Enlightenment culture. It has all of the benefits therein. There are subcultures inside of it, like EA and D&D players and stuff like that, that might push for specific things. But there's this large monoculture is the best word for it. I just trying to find other words, but I like the take here from Hanson. I want to point out he opens this in a nice, fun way. He says, "Many are optimists or pessimists by temperament. They tend to look for the bright side or the dark in most everything." And then parenthetically, except for us, them stuff, of course, where us seems bright and them dark no matter what. And in these terms, I've leaned bright, especially regarding reforms in the future. And that's why he says, it's painful for me to focus now on a big way our future looks dark.
Yeah.
He says he's spent 5 months thinking about fertility fall and trying to think of plausible concrete fixes. Then he sees that the problem is this deeper cultural drift. And so yeah, he's like, well, there's ideas, like we could try to get people to have more kids, but that's not really going to work. We're just going to be outbred by people who already want to have more. People like the Collinses are trying to start their own culture of pushing back against this, right?
Yeah.
And then this is classic Hanson. This is why I always love his takes. He says, obvious to him, not to us, I think, one option is to turn back the clock. If we bombed our world back to low tech with bad travel and bad communication and much poverty and disease and war, that'd probably soon ensure sufficient cultural diversity and selection.
Yeah. That would certainly work.
That is one option if your goal is only to increase the amount of cultural diversity. Yes, that is one obvious way to do it. Professor Quirrell, I fucking love it. I mean, that would not be on my list of obvious approaches, and it's obviously not on his list of things to actually do either. But he's saying this is one thing that could work. And as you said, it just rounds out basically saying there really isn't anything that we can think of.
He says one ideal solution would be to get people to create, sustain, and accept great diversity in deep values among those that they can easily travel and talk to. That is kind of what I was trying to say maybe these sort of cringe gates would be helpful for. I don't think this is actually a good solution because I don't think it'll work. The subcultures are too small and the cringe gates are not strong enough, but I think it's better than doing nothing at all. If you manage to create insular subcultures that have things that keep out the monoculture, then there'll be at least some places that do have deep values differences with the monoculture that continue existing. And I think that's really good. And I do think both EA and rationalism count as one such thing. Probably a bunch of weird religions too. I think the Mormons used to count. I'm not sure if they still count.
Yeah, he says in here, like, we need more cults or something, which I thought was fun. But of course, the downside to the, EAs and rationalists being subcultures here is that we are not reproducing at more than replacement rate.
That's true.
We rely heavily on conversion, which I think is helping.
I do think that Collinses are doing a great job of setting up a cringe gate. Like, the vast majority of people, when they look at them and what they're doing, are like, okay, I'm staying the fuck away from that. And that is exactly what they want. And the people who want to join them in this project of having, 8 children and being weird, they're attracting exactly those people and keeping out the ones that don't want that. So really good job on them for both knowing what they want and having a cringe gate to keep out the normies.
More broadly speaking, what is the problem with having a monoculture? I already have some of the answer, but I'm going to just play the skeptic for a second. Like, I look around at society and we have it mostly right. And it's trending in an even more correct direction. So what's the problem?
Well, okay, 2 problems. One of them being that if you have it mostly right, but you have one thing wrong that's going to lead to extinction, that's a really big deal. The second one being that conditions change. I believe our friend Carrie made this example. If you're on the edge of the Sahara and you have 10 years of just like great rain, the grasses are going to spring up and cover the area and have an absolute field day, and it's going to be a great decade for them. But then when conditions change and it reverts back to the more standard Sahara climate, they are all going to die out. That's fine if the grasses weren't the only ecosystem. Then, the shrubs and the trees and whatever else has evolved in that niche will continue going. But if the grasses took over everything, then once they die out, there is a lifeless wasteland left. That's the problem with having just one culture that spans the entire Western world. If conditions change to some point where it is no longer adaptive, and having a single culture, it's probably unlikely they're going to be completely adaptive to everything, then there's going to be a civilizational collapse.
So we'll at least need some pocket of people as doomsday preppers, so they're ready for the Mad Max apocalypse.
Yeah, doomsday prepping would be nice at the very least.
Yeah.
It would be great if there were several distinct cultures, even within the United States, that could continue to function under one government and yet be significantly different cultures.
Do you think that his proposed solution for basically every societal problem of futarchy would be a plausible fix?
I don't think he even thinks that at this point. I think there's a plausible solution to our current problem, okay, my belief right now is that we're going to get lack of population replacement and civilizational collapse unless we have radical life extension and increased fertility tech. I think the increased fertility tech will be trivial once we have radical life extension. We can just continue having babies into our 90s and 200s and whatever. But if we are stuck at our current lifespans, then I don't think our civilization is going to continue all that much longer.
Interesting.
On the plus side, I think we got a damn good chance of getting radical life extension.
Yeah, maybe I'm just not versed enough in, despite having talked to the Collinses and looked into this a bit and, read this post and stuff as well, I'm still not the least bit concerned about population collapse. And maybe I would be if I lived in South Korea, for example, and I was reaching retirement age. I'm like, how the hell am I going to eat? But
as they point out, South Korea is just America 2 decades ahead.
Right. And I think maybe it's because my timeline for the technological changes required to solve these problems is less than 2 decades, that I'm not losing a lot of sleep over it.
Yeah.
But if a decade goes by and things don't change much, I might start losing sleep.
Right. Tech, I think, is what will save us.
Yeah, I think so, too.
And if it doesn't, then we're doomed. But I think it will.
I think tech will either save us or what's the opposite of save us?
Doom us?
Yeah. It'll either be our salvation or our destruction.
It'll be like Anakin. It was supposed to be our savior, not our... what was the line?
You were supposed to bring balance to the Force, not destroy... No, that's not it. No one remembers because Star Wars wasn't actually that good.
Yes, certainly not the prequels.
I think even this is now moving past the subject, but I think even the old ones, they were great in the 70s. They do not hold up as modern good movies, I don't think. Like that same story has been told better in newer movies, but I think those movies at the time were culturally significant because they were the first kinds to really do the the humble hero could even be you sort of thing, right?
I think they do it very good in how pure they are to the concept without getting distracted by other things. What movies do you think do it even better nowadays?
I'd have to think, but I'm just trying to think of other... I was going to point out the Harry Potter books, for example. If you want a story of no, anyone can be the humble hero and rise to greatness, that's a great example.
Also, the original Matrix movie.
Yeah. I mean, those both suffer from... Both of those people were in one manner or another destined to be the great one.
Yeah.
But if you want to squint... Well, no, actually, you don't have to squint because the prequels didn't include Anakin Skywalker and the prophecy and stuff. So, yeah, that was more of just, anyone who wants to help can, and you can be the difference that changes the world.
Yeah, it's true, because in the original movies, Luke wasn't even Vader's kid. At least not in a way that the audience knew, yeah.
Yeah, and even when he was, there was never any inclination about... There was no prophecy stuff going on. It was just conflicts that were present at the time.
Thinking on those... They do the story differently, like Harry Potter and The Matrix and Star Wars. Do you think they actually do it better, though, by some metric? I think it could just be different.
I'll have to think about it more. Because I know I've thought about this in the past, but now I want to think of more specific examples. Different and better are going to be relative terms. At some point, you're comparing apples to oranges, not apples to better apples. I don't know if I could find something that's analogous enough to Star Wars and say this did it better. I was going to say Game of Thrones, maybe. What I like about it is again, the humble hero that doesn't come from nobility. The whole point being that you could be the protagonist. Lots of TV shows and movies do that. I think I said Game of Thrones. There's probably some prophecy stuff going on in the background, but if I forgot if that was even a factor. there's bloodlines and whatever, but like at the end of the day, it's just like whoever tries hard, and you can make a difference.
Okay.
That's also not to beat my usual horse of Marvel stuff, but that's also kind of the whole Marvel thing, especially with the lamer heroes like Hawkeye.
Right.
We can't be super soldiers, we can't be gods like Thor, but anyone can be the Hawkeye of the team, right?
I'm not sure if that's great praise, though, because anyone can be the Hawkeye sounds a lot like anyone can be the lame dude that doesn't really help much.
Well, except he does. He contributes.
Does he?
Yeah. The thing is like this doesn't analogize well to Star Wars because he eventually gets magic powers. If Luke didn't have the capacity to get magic powers, he couldn't have helped as much as he did. So like there actually does need to be some element of like, no, you actually are special.
Even in the first one, Luke actually is special. He's like got a natural talent for using the Force that is in excess of most people.
Right. Well, I think most people can't tap it at all.
Right. So yeah,
Yeah.
he can tap it at all, which by itself is special, and he's a bit strong. Is he actually stronger than the average in the first one? You can't tell in the first one because Force use has become so rare. Even just finding one guy that can use the Force is a pretty damn big deal.
Yeah, in the 20 years between the prequels and the original trilogy, the Force became an ancient dead religion.
We're pretending the prequels never happened because fuck
I
that
just
shit.
like how funny it is. But leaving that aside, you're right. All he did, I think, is he showed a quick propensity for learning that was probably non-typical.
Han Solo totally treats it like Gnosticism.
I can't remember the line that set it up, but I did see the first of like the new trilogy. He's being asked by the stormtrooper. I don't remember anyone's names. The point is like, well, maybe the guy is like, well, maybe he can use the Force or something. And Han, he looks at him in his perfect Harrison Ford growl, just says, "That's not how the Force works." And like, that he knows fuck all about how the Force works, but he's like, even I know that's not how it works, dumbass.
Cool.
He's got just such a great growl. He needs to play villains at some point. Anyway, do we want to talk about the Less Wrong posts?
Yes, we should do that now. Alrighty, well, let's do. Whoa, Jesus, Steven, what did we almost forget to thank?
Oh, I didn't forget at all. I've got the spreadsheet open. Well, we declare our undying fealty and loyalty to the Guild of the Rose.
Hell yeah, we do.
They host workshops and put together classes for embettering your life in every regard. Everything from decision making to finance to how to best use AI tools. It's all there at theguildoftherose.org. I haven't checked actually in the last couple of weeks, but they announced an update to the skill tree. But it's all laid out in a very fun, gamified way where you get to track your progress in useful and measurable way. And there's a community aspect that can't be overstated.
Yeah.
So to be clear, you can join the Guild of the Rose and at the free level or the paid level and not join a cohort and not have to do any of the commitment stuff. If you want to do that stuff, you'll be sorted into a cohort that you'll meet with once a week, and you guys will be the ones that attend workshops together and then work together after those to either like do the assignments or just hang out. And it helps build that community of help me out here, sanity. That keeps you, not just keeps you honest, but keeps you good and keeps you leveling up. Keeps not just you, but everyone in the group.
We are great fans of these people. We think they do great work, which is why we partner with them. And you can check them out at guildoftherose.org or in the show notes.
Yes. All right.
We fortunately have a bit of a break from deep quantum math stuff to talk about philosophy again.
Yay.
The first post is Where Philosophy Meets Science. I'll just go ahead and read this first little chunk that I pulled out.
Yeah, get us started here.
Okay. The whole conceit of this series of posts is that he is writing from a alternate timeline, maybe that knows what quantum physics actually is and is looking back on the history of how people went wrong. He says that early scientists forgot that they themselves were made out of particles. They didn't notice that knowing about the electron's history was an example of particles in different places. It's much more intuitive, it feels simpler, to think about someone knowing something, rather than thinking about the brain's particles occupying a different state. Ancient physicists found it natural to think, I know where the photon was, what difference could that make? Not, my brain's particle's current state correlates to the photon's history, what difference could that make?
I like how you said that he's taking this from like an alternate history where we're viewing this from a different lens. He's just taking it from the current view now, right?
Yeah.
He's taking it not an alternate history. He's looking at history through today's lenses. If we knew what we knew today, they wouldn't have gone wrong in this direction.
Yes, but through today's lenses where everybody has more or less agreed that multiple worlds, spoiler alert, this is going with the multiple worlds interpretation, that multiple worlds is how quantum physics is best explained, and there's nobody still holding out to older, more wrong interpretations.
Gotcha.
And therefore, this sort of observation feels kind of obvious to them, whereas it still doesn't to a lot of people in the current world.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
This is a thing that certainly didn't occur to me when I was reading about quantum physics in my early 20s. Like, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I also, even to this day, intuitively think of my knowledge states as not being encoded in particles being in different locations. It feels like a completely separate thing, which is the same kind of thing that makes most people feel like that souls are a thing and that consciousness is a thing, because all of those are like somehow separate from particles being in different places within a skull, when really that's all they are. It's unintuitive to think of thoughts as that sort of thing.
Yeah, this is just classic reductionist world that we live in. It's not useful for me to think of my brain as a wave function or a set of particles that correlate to, or that of which states hold whatever, encode my beliefs and perceptions and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like, no, I just think of my brain as meat. That is the useful level of abstraction for me. Maybe neurons,
Right.
But like, I don't think of anything in terms of fundamental particles.
Right.
So it is more intuitive and feels, and I like how he puts feels in italics. It feels simpler, and I believe that links to Occam's razor. It feels simpler, and it actually is until you're doing quantum physics. To be clear, it doesn't make it right. Our brains actually are the bottom level stuff, but it's not useful to think of them. If I'm crossing the street, which I do frequently to go to the store that's down the road, I don't look at cars. I don't look at anything this way because I'm not a physicist, but I don't look at them as masses of particles, right? I look at them as dangerous, impending objects, right?
Yeah.
The level of which it's useful to interact with reality versus the way reality actually is.
The part that still feels weirdly foreign to me is thinking of the patterns of activations in my head as corresponding literally to particles moving to different places.
Yeah, I have that same sort of sense of weirdness if I could take it a level higher and just think of like my neurons. Like,
yeah.
It seems weird to think that like, oh, this neuron fires when I think of George W. Bush. Like that's nuts.
See, it's weird. That doesn't feel nearly as nuts to me. To me, like the whole pattern swirling in my head of neural activations feels like a thing that I can grasp. But then when I think that those patterns literally are just small particles moving from one place to a different place, that's where I'm like, whoa.
Yeah, it can be small, but
Give
then
me another rip of that bong, man.
So neurons is small, but not so small that it gives you that whoa, huh?
Mm-hmm.
I can feel you there. It definitely adds a whole other layer because I don't like the word because it sounds like, I don't know, it sounds like vomiting, but I can grok a neuron, right?
Right.
But I can't grok my brain as a state of, particles.
Yeah. The important consideration that he pulls out based on that last quote is the question, is your theory of fundamental physics going to examine all the particles in a human brain and decide when those particles know something in order to compute the motions of particles? This is basically what interpretations that deal with observation being important have to contend with. That why your theory is now going to have to include something that looks at particles in humans' brain and decides when those particles know something or not. And that is a silly thing to have to include in a theory about how things move.
It would beg the necessary question of like, how could you tell? When do you know that these particles know something? What's weird is that at some point, they actually do, right?
Yeah.
That now I see where I've taken a sufficient bong rip to see that. Like, I can understand that more intuitively on the level of a neuron, but when I think of that in terms of particles, like particles don't know anything, but you get enough of them together, and suddenly I know that the sky is blue.
Yeah, and that's a problem for a theory of motion. It shouldn't have to account for having an entire theory of knowledge in order to determine how things move. He does point out, though, that this comes down to a problem of philosophy rather than a problem of experimentation, because he says the early quantum scientists were doing all the right experiments. It was their interpretation that was off. And the problems of interpretation were not the result of their getting the statistics wrong. It seems that the insights they needed were philosophical ones. And yet, it wasn't professional philosophers who swooped in and solved the problem and cleared up the mystery and made everything normal again. It was, well, physicists.
Yeah, this is one of those cases where, and I don't know the history of quantum mechanics all that well, but I'm pretty sure the cutting edge discoveries in the physics departments weren't discussed in the philosophy departments yet. So it's like
Hmm.
maybe philosophers jumping in at this stage could have helped. Maybe some collaboration would have sped this along, but that's not how it played out historically.
He said that even where one philosopher gets it right in advance, it's usually science that ends up telling us which philosopher is right, not the prior consensus of the philosophical community.
This is where, and I think he mentions Democritus, concluding that the world is made of atoms. Like, he got it right, not by accident. He got it right by reason, but
Hmm.
he didn't get it right scientifically. His thinking was you can only cut something in half so many times before it stops being that thing. That thing must be that is an atom. Did he deduce the reality of nature? Well, no, actually, because he didn't get quantum mechanics. But I don't know. I've always felt like he got an undue amount of credit for that insight. He didn't deserve no credit, but it's like he didn't figure out atoms.
Yeah,
He just figured that you couldn't cut something in half too many times, and he was right. If I have one gold atom and I cut it in half, I don't have two gold atoms.
yeah.
I have a big fucking mess, and then two different atoms.
And maybe radiation and shit. Who knows?
Yeah.
Oh. The final thing I pulled out of here is him saying that philosophy is only practiced effectively from within a science. Otherwise, you get philosophers who are mainly speaking to other philosophers and not really doing anything. So, professional philosophers, in quotes, would be very, very wise to learn every scrap of relevant seeming science that they can possibly get their hands on. And he doesn't say this, but I'm pointing out that we generally don't get this. I used to really like philosophy. I think the sequences was one of the things that kind of pointed out to me that philosophers seem like they aren't doing very much.
I think it depends on the philosopher. Like Dan Dennett definitely is an example of a philosopher who grabbed all the relevant science he could get his hands on and
Hmm.
used that to inform his philosophy. Nick Bostrom is another good example. It's not like these people don't exist. It's just that they aren't maybe the majority of philosophers. I don't know what the majority of philosophers are, or what they do, what their numbers are like. Trying to do philosophy in the complete absence of science, just you're basically destined to get it wrong unless you're accidentally right, like Democritus.
Yeah.
I agree with that point. A philosopher is best served by learning learning all the relevant science that they can. And
Yeah.
I would argue that scientists would be better equipped if they were to be somewhat versed in some of the relevant philosophy.
I do think that a scientist would be probably a bit better of a scientist if they had some philosophy. Like a good philosopher is basically just a scientist who has some philosophy thrown on top.
Well, we can't know true Scotsmen away like good philosophers, right?
Can't we?
I mean, maybe we actually can, and we'll just say like, look, there aren't actually good philosophers. There's just modest scientists or something. But there's another line in here where he says, and this will seem like a domain of philosophy. It will seem to you that you must do philosophical thinking in order to sort out the confusion. An example that I think of philosophy that I think would make better scientists is Bayesian rationality. It at bottom, it's a philosophical framework. It's not the result of science.
Yeah.
Like it relies on axioms that you have to adopt, and that's your philosophical bedrock. Like at the bottom of every philosophy, you can keep asking why until you just say just because, just like you can with nature.
And yet,
At the end, it's like, well, why do I care about my positions being consistent, or why should I care about getting the right answer? At some point, there's just no answer to that, and you just say, well, that's what I care about. And given that I do, Bayesian rationality is the approach I want to have. Like,
yeah.
I don't think the framing of like philosophy or science is appropriate.
I strongly agree with you that basically Bayesian rationality is a philosophy, and yet I do think it's better for it not to think of itself as such and to think of it more as, decision theory or statistics or a way to inform how one does science, because it just seems like once you start thinking about something as a philosophy, it starts getting up its own butt instead of actually concentrating on the real world. And
Well,
but it's definitely a philosophy of how to interact with the real world in a way that leads you away from error.
right. And someone could push back and wonder, like, well, then why do I care about getting worldviews that are free from error? And it's like, well, the point of this framework isn't to convince you of that. It's if you already want that. I want to toss out an example here of like, where do you think this falls? The domain of AI alignment.
Hmm.
I think it started as a philosophy and then moved into the realm of science after. Like it started out as philosophizing.
Sure. I'm going to go with like at the very earliest levels, yes. As he says, like at the most early levels, before there's any science we can do to something, all we have is philosophy. But I think it pretty quickly turned into study of decision theory, possibly with a little bit of programming thrown in.
That's fair, and that's sort of the answer I was thinking of. I don't know the timeline of how long it stayed in the realm of philosophy and not science or whatever, but I guess my thinking is that separating those two isn't necessarily useful. At the beginning, it just was a realization that wait, hold on, why would smart equal nice? And that's not a science question, at least
Yeah.
not when first asked. It's a philosophy question.
Mm-hmm.
Things become philosophy after. He does wrap this up in a nice way that I really liked. He says, "This is not to say that there's no place for professional philosophers in the world. Some problems are so chaotic that there is no established place for them at all in the halls of science." Then I'll grab the last sentence, which says, "They should not be surprised at the prospect that experiment and not debate will finally settle an argument. They should not flinch away from running their own experiments if they can possibly think of it." And I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Good philosophy should have experiments and should propose them.
And should try to become a science as quickly as it can.
Well, it's one of those things of like, when you try to make something a science, some people push back. Like Sam Harris wrote a book called, what was his ethics book called? Basically, he's like utilitarianism. I'm taking that as the appropriate way to think about things. And he doesn't call it that. It's more broadly consequentialism. You have to just take as an axiom that the suffering of conscious beings is bad. If you don't believe that, then this isn't for you. People would point that as a weakness of the philosophy of his position, but it's at some point there is just bedrock.
I think that's one of those points that they didn't agree on until the Enlightenment. And when that culture swept through and took everything over, I don't think there was broad agreement among humans that suffering is bad. Which is interesting, right?
I think you're probably right. And I mean, depending on how finely you want to dice that sentence, there's people who still disagree now. But I brought that up because I'm wondering what experiment could they possibly think of that would validate that position? When you grant enough axioms just to get your shoes tied so you can start moving, then it's possible to actually do experiments, or look at natural experiments. Which societies fare better, the ones where girls are allowed to learn how to read or the ones where they're not? And then, of course, like, what do you mean by better? I don't know. Who lives longer? Which of those cultures have more money and comfort?
One might ask which of those cultures still exists in a few hundred years and hasn't gone extinct due to not reproducing.
Right. Or which of those cultures has historically already gone extinct?
Yeah.
Those are some natural experiments you could run. This is interesting, and this will be the last thing I say on the point, just because otherwise I could spend all day, navel gazing at it. But I think you need to get a certain bedrock of philosophy going, and then you can start doing your science. And a lot of I was going to say wasted philosophy time is spent arguing about the bedrock, but you do actually need that. Okay. But I think that there's a lot of contemporary stuff where it's like, look, guys, this is just settled, or it's settled enough that I'm going to move on. And if you guys figure out that, no, it turns out it's actually never, ever, ever ethical to lie, then let me know. But I think Kant was wrong.
I do think he mentions in this post that there was a time where should we use the scientific method? Like, even the scientific method was a question of philosophy, right? And eventually that became settled as actually, yeah, scientific method is the best way to learn about the world. But that was not a settled question for a long period of time. No,
yeah, of course. It had to be invented.
Yeah.
And I mean...
And I think that's what you're saying about having a foundation that we agree on.
Yeah. And that foundation can grow and expand. We've all read Method of Rationality. We remember him describing N-rays, the introduction into the scientific method of double blinding. That wasn't a thing 150 years ago. That's part of what makes this system so awesome, is that it is correcting. If there are, peer review was looked at for a long time as this awesomely important feature of it. And I think compelling arguments have been made recently that says, it was a good idea at the time, but it seems not to have borne fruit. Mm-hmm. And so maybe peer review will go out and we'll focus more on replication. Over time, the ratchet of science just gets better, more refined.
Yeah, and I think it does.
Part of one of its features is that it allows itself for that kind of modification.
Yeah.
If they had said, nope, we figured this out, we've settled it in 1675, this is how we're going to do science forever, and this is the best way to do it, they would fall behind people who decided they're not going to do science, they're going to do science 2.0.
Which is why they're not around anymore.
Yeah, and then they all died because they didn't solve aging yet.
Shit. Oh, boy.
All right. Well, Eneasz, can you prove that two particles are identical?
As a matter of fact, I can.
Ooh.
Yeah, which is kind of interesting. Yeah, well, this is continuing his previous post about philosophy of science, because this kind of originally starts out as a philosophical question, which later turns into an empirical question. So he is using this, I think, as an example or as a follow-on from the previous previous sequence post.
Yeah.
He is talking with a philosopher named Bob and asks that philosopher if you can prove that two particles are identical. Not can you personally prove it, but in theory, in principle, is it even possible to prove that two particles are identical if you're a human? And Bob is saying no, because no matter how many experiments show that two particles are similar, tomorrow you might discover an experiment that distinguishes between them. They might have extra properties that we didn't know to look for, or differences that are too small for us to currently measure. Those things are conceivable, and therefore it's logically possible that such things could exist, and two particles that we thought we had proved were identical turn out not to be.
I love that as somebody with philosophical inclinations and favorings, that line of reasoning sounds persuasive. Eliezer politely points out that Bob isn't being stupid. He's right in any classical universe. And he's not just doing like this could be the Matrix or the problem of induction or whatever. It's kind of problem of induction, but it's one level above that of just saying, look, it's just humble. It's properly humble to say we might discover a way to do this tomorrow.
You know what throws up the red flags for me nowadays?
Hmm.
When Bob says conceivable and therefore logically possible.
Yes, I think we've had enough conversations that rely on conceivability in the last few months that have raised my attention to that as well. I need a lot more help after conceivability to believe that you've convinced me of anything.
And to believe that conceivable actually even means anything in the real world.
Right.
But as Eliezer points out, that he is right in a classical universe, but we don't live in a classical universe. Our ability to perform an experiment that tells us whether two particles are entirely identical actually goes right to the heart of what distinguishes the quantum from the classical. In this regard, this may be one of the most important posts in the quantum sequences, and is kind of what the previous several posts were building to. What it comes down to, why this actually is a thing that one can test if the world is quantum rather than classical, is, as Eliezer says, if you have a particle 1 and a particle 2, and it's possible in the experiment for both particle 1 and 2 to end up in either of two possible locations, I'm going to call them location A and B. He uses L1, L2, but A and B I think is simpler. Then the observed distribution of results will depend on whether particle 1 at A, particle 2 at B, and particle 1 at B, particle 2 at A is the same configuration or two distinct configurations. If they're the same configuration, then we add up the amplitudes flowing in. If they're different configurations, then we keep the amplitudes separate. And because of this property, we can actually test what happens. Do the amplitudes combine? Do we add them up? Or do we keep them separate? If we add them up, then two particles are identical. Particle 1 at A, particle 2 at B is the exact same thing as particle 1 at B, particle 2 at A, because there is no particle 1, particle 2, there's just electron in a fully general sense, or photon, or whatever. That is actually not covered in this post. That is covered later. I am jumping the gun here, but this post is asking the question, is it even possible to make this experiment to determine this? And in a quantum universe, actually, yes, there is. And that's how we know we're in a quantum universe, not a classical one.
Nice, yeah. Well summarized. And I mean, not to be negative Nancy on this, but I like these two posts because they weren't mathy.
Yeah.
We don't need a lot of diagrams to understand the meat of these.
Yeah, so Bob's problem, Bob assumed that particles are fundamentally real. And in the classical universe they are, but in our universe, the individual and fundamentally real entities are configurations of multiple particles, and the amplitude flows between them. Which means that actually quantum discoveries changed the whole nature of the game, from a world that was the sum of individual particles to a world that is the sum of amplitude flows between multi-particle configurations. I think that some interpretations still do not accept this, which is what makes the quantum sequences controversial.
Yeah, fair enough. And at least in my mind, the real point of the sequence isn't to teach you quantum mechanics. It's to teach you that reality is normal and you're weird. And,
yes.
If you find nature confusing, that's your problem, not nature's. To me, it doesn't really matter which version he's teaching. If he's teaching the one that everyone agreed now was wrong, then I would give that a huge asterisk and point that out. But I think that this is at least a popular view, if not the supermajority view.
I don't think it's the supermajority view.
No, yeah, but I think it probably is over 50%. Although I'm not sure. Physicists will be able to weigh in better than I can. It's kind of fun, though, to think about, like, this does seem to be another point, like, where does philosophy meet science? Like, if you have physicists doing the same experiments and the same results and disagreeing, what are they doing? Are they disagreeing philosophically or empirically?
I mean, almost certainly philosophically, right? Unless they're criticizing the other person's methods.
Yeah, well, I'm saying in a circumstance where they're, running the same tests and getting the same results.
Yeah.
And they think, no, it means this. Well, no, I think it means this. They're doing philosophy at that point. And
Yeah.
I think that's kind of where he wraps up here. He says that experiments falsify assumptions we can't even see.
I really like that. I don't think anybody really realized that one of our core assumptions is that particles are fundamentally real. Experiments can falsify an assumption that we didn't even realize we were making, that particles are real, you know?
Yes, that's a great point. I'm glad you highlighted that because, like, I was talking a bit before about philosophical bedrock and needing a foundation, especially when the foundation's been there for long enough. You stop thinking about it. You think this is just the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you get a result that falsifies one of your base assumptions,
Yeah,
you think
that
that
wasn't even in the running to be falsified.
right. So you think, okay, well, something weird is going on, not something about my model was wrong. He says, bear this in mind the next time you're wondering whether mere empirical science might have something totally unexpected to say about some impossible seeming philosophical question.
Yeah. All right, well, what do we got for next time?
3 of them next time. We've got classical configuration spaces, the quantum arena, and Feynman paths.
Yes, and these are very heavy on the math and the nitty gritty, and
Yay!
and they have a lot of diagrams in them. So we are not going to cover very much of that at all. We'll give a very rough, non-detailed, non-technical summary of the posts as best as is our ability. And I know it's still going to take me way too much time, and I'm not looking forward to it. And then it's going to be kind of a shitty summary, but I'm going to do the best I can with the brain I got.
I think that's the best we can do. Like I said at the beginning of these, we're either going to read them all verbatim and put the pictures of the diagrams in the show notes, or we're going to give them non satisfactory summaries.
Yeah.
So that's where we're at. All right.
Cool.
And last but certainly not least, we've got to give a shout out to one of our supporters this episode.
Hell yeah.
I'm going to give a shout out to Robert Kennedy, who is our supporter this episode. Thank you so much for your support. I know that sounds weak, but it's so hard to articulate every time. This makes a huge difference, and I hope that you found this valuable, and thank you for your support to keep this project going. It means a lot and makes a huge difference.
Yeah, we strongly appreciate it. We couldn't keep this going without the support of our listeners. The monetary support really helps a lot. So seriously, thank you, Robert Kennedy, for keeping us going.
Yeah, you rock.
All right. Well, I think that's everything. So, Steven, I'll talk to you again in 2 weeks.
Sounds great. Thanks, man.
Thanks. Bye.
See ya.